We just wanted to kind of start with talking about how do we go about it. It's pretty clear from the broad representation of people that have come here to this meeting and over the last number of years that people really want to see this happen. People want to work together for environmental stewardship. People want to be sharing information among the different communities and among the different jurisdictions, and so that seems pretty clear. So how do we go about actually setting something up that's going to work for everybody? We've been calling it the Hudson Bay Consortium so far, but we've been trying to be clear that the consortium hasn't been created yet. And the process would be something that people are working together to create, not something that's created for them to join. And so how do we do something that's going to reflect all the different jurisdictions? So there's lots of other places around the world where people have figured out ways to work together and cooperate and form a structure. And so what kind of structure is going to work for Hudson Bay and James Bay? And there's things like the Arctic Council is a good model to think about. And for the Arctic Council, though, of course, it's all different nations. So everyone that's sitting around the table there is another federal government. And the complex thing about Hudson Bay is that the stakeholders come from many different levels of organizations. We have the federal government, we have the provinces, we have the regional organizations, we have the communities. So how do we create something where a community can join and still be around the table at the same level as the government? And how do we create that so it's sustainable for funding, what sort of different expectations? So it's a really interesting scenario, I think, and there's other precedents, like on the West Coast, they formed this MAP project that's been really successful. In that situation, they don't have land claim agreements, but they've managed to get a whole bunch of different First Nations groups working together. The International Joint Commission was something that was talked about in some of the recommendations as a model that, mostly because it's been very successful for a long time, but in many ways that is also a nation-to-nation agreement, and it's a legally binding kind of agreement. And so there's some things about it that might be really good, but is that something that's really going to work for this cooperation among so many different levels of government working together? So we really want to have mostly a discussion about this kind of thing. Just thinking about the context again, we have the federal government, Environment Canada, DFO, INAC, Parks Canada. We have the provinces, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Territory of Nunavut. We have the different land claim organizations. We have the different marine regions and their overlap agreements, and we have the different communities. So what sort of structure is going to work? And we'd really like to have that conversation. Yeah, Louisa? Yes, thank you. Would you like to go ahead and say an opening prayer? Is there no microphone there?
Ulakot Nikubiluta Atanan Shangan Nikubilakta. Let's stand for we seek all the direction from our Creator. Tukchalakta. Gutiatata tukcha ugibatigit mana ulangi piyang na rumitiluta. Anong ninyo itong na itumutasiulak tigot pijumaya sakatita banda kalugo pijumaya sutunya katanalo atanek tasiulak tigot tamani tigot ilabulok machimaya busay maktitaw sa makulugit tukcha puji siwatingani. Amen.
Thank you.
Just to make it a little bit more perspective, what we're trying to do here is to think about Hudson Bay, James Bay as a big cathedral in the south, like Montreal, Toronto, and where else in the world. Cathedral, big church. And the people in that community or city do not want to see the cathedral being destroyed. So what we're trying to do is think about Hudson Bay, James Bay, Hudson Strait as a cathedral. We don't want anything to happen to it. Or if something's going to happen to it, we have to understand what that means to us. Because also try to understand the Hudson Bay, what's going on within Hudson Bay. We've been telling our people that we want to hunt a little bit longer. Just keep that in mind, what we're trying to do. And the only way there'll be little movement of something's happening or trying to understand what's happening in Hudson Bay is if we work together. Just look at the map over there, look, the Hudson Bay, James Bay. And us in Beltrala, we're right in the middle of all that, right? You have to consider, if anything I do within the mainland, what's going to happen to Beltrala? Just think about that. Or along the coast, because of the hunters. We sell hunt today. People sell hunt today. So just keep that in mind. Thanks.
Staff.
Good morning, everybody. A bit of a different day we're waking up to than yesterday, but let me not dwell on that topic. I understand the analogy that you're making, Lucas, and I respect that. And I understand the concept of this coalition that we're trying to put together, be it a round table or whatever you want to call it. I do have a question, though. I mean, you spoke, Joel, about the current people around the table and the potential membership. But for myself and on behalf of Makivik Corporation, I want to make sure that I fully do understand if we're being inclusionary in all of this, where do we draw the line? And how do we define on who is a member, who is not? And once that's decided, we haven't spoken about it, but what is the decision-making process, and does everybody have an equal voice in all of this? This is some cause for concern for me, because I don't think that necessarily if we do have NGOs or animal rights groups that are participatory to it, that we're aligned with the same kind of either the same types of objectives, nor do I think that we would necessarily be on the same page in terms of decision-making processes. So I think that's a fundamental question that we have to put on the table right now so that all of us understand that. And I'm not sure, at least for myself, speaking for myself, I don't understand that. So if we could, perhaps if you want to respond to that, I'd like to hear it, or if other people have questions in that same vein, I'd appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're setting up to talk about now, and I think some of those questions I hadn't really thought about. We, if there's a lot of outside groups, if we want to be inclusionary for everyone across James Bay and Hudson Bay, but if we're totally open and the steering committee is weighted by outside groups, and that might be a problem. I think we might need some kind of an evolving structure to meet the needs of right now, because I think right now most of the people that want to be involved are stakeholders for the Bay versus outside voices trying to change the Bay. But I think that's really important. So let's go. We're going to go through a couple of slides. People can stop at any time, just to kind of think about what sort of things do we need to think about in terms of structure. Yeah. Henry.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're not feeling sad about because of the vote last night. But I want to say something. My cousin George Kulu is here on the other side, between those two guys over there from from Womenji, the guy with the white hair. He's my cousin, first cousin. My father and my mother were sisters, and that's him, George Kurulu. Yes, but he lives down there with them, and I'm glad that he's well taken care of. But I want to say, when I like this kind of meetings, because I want everyone to know who wants to make studies of different things. I'm just going to have one example from DFO, just an example. The migration routes of beluga, they were very limited when I saw those, what they were showing on the map, on the slide. If you're going to make studies, make sure that you finish, go out, go to all the communities and see that example, beluga, the migration routes, instead of just making decisions that this is how they travel. Because I saw lots of empty spaces where beluga go through also in different communities. Different species, not species, but we have Churchill stock, we have James Bay stock, Eastern Hudson Bay stock, and I didn't see any migration route going through my community. For instance, that only example, and those other communities also along the Eastern Hudson Bay coast that these stocks go through. So when you want to make some studies, go to all the communities and finish the most ultimate, all the information that you can gather and put it on paper, so that we will not be left out because we are Inuit people and we depend on them. Like persons from down south will depend on money. They will not do anything without any money. And for us, same thing with animals that we eat up there. It's just the same. A person cannot do anything or eat anything down south without any money, and we cannot eat anything without animals up north. If you're going to make studies, do it properly. Use the extent of your knowledge so that you will not leave any spaces where these animals go through, or anything, small crustaceans or whatever. If you're going to make studies on plants or whatever, it's on the Hudson's Bay. So I encourage everyone, if you're going to make studies, do it properly. Put the people first. If you're going to make a study about beluga, that was my example. Include all the communities. So that you will have the right information. What I saw yesterday, if you give it to Canada, DFO is from Canada anyway, and if you put it on your books like that, you're going to leave lots of migration routes of the beluga. That's just the example. I can go on and on, but just to let you know, include everyone if you're going to make a study or report on where we live. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So just thinking about in terms of like how an organization is formed and whether it's a formal thing that gets incorporated or something that's through a memorandum of understanding or terms of reference. In terms of thinking, the terms of reference or the philosophy of the group of how we're going to work together will really determine how that's kind of set up. And so if we have the right kind of terms of reference and people have to sign on to a terms of reference to be members, then maybe that prevents the sort of thing that Stas was raising as a potential concern about, that it would be animal rights groups. So if we have the right terms of reference, then that wouldn't be something they would necessarily want to sign on to. So we have to make sure this approach is something that works for the benefit of communities across James Bay and Hudson Bay. Yeah.
1, 2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What are my concern is we need to put a lot of consultation to our communities because there's so many overlapping already, and there's another form body will be big confusion for the communities. Myself, it's my first time. I don't know, rest of you are been sitting here for a long time. And so I would like to see more consultation to the community level. If we just popped up, there's a lot of organizations that involved in that is not here. And our Angubiga Mike is not here. That really dealt with the Eastern Hudson's Bay. So this is very critical for me. And there's a lot of, what we hear is scientists here. And I grew up with all the surveys and the studies being happening, but there's never seemed to have a result. And they even survey how we eat. You know, it's just, these are a lot of things that we're facing today. And my community, a lot of people said, I'm tired of surveys. We don't want to speak anymore about surveys. They want to know about us. I think there's so many that being done. It's in a shell. It's been dust that thick. And go look, I think we should look at those. That been done before. And I wish I could speak better in English. Last night, we all watched the election. There's going to be a wall between Canada and US. That means polar bears are free. It's no longer scared for the American. So this is only my example. These things are we facing today. We live with it. Now we are struggling with it because from the outsiders making decisions for us. So this is very critical to me. I would like to more consultation for my people. Thank you.
Very important points, and we do have a variety of researchers and people in the room, but I think the idea is to set this up so that it's coming from the community level, things like Voices from the Bay and the reports and things we talked about yesterday, that it's set up from the organizations that are up here and from something that's going to work for the people that are up here. And then on the consultation side, I think that's absolutely important, and so the approach has been to try and take this stepwise and slow And we're not going to try and finalize any decisions here today, but we're trying to finalize a starting point that we would take back to the communities for consultation and that we can think about so that we, over the next year, before we come together and meet again, we can have gone through some of that consultation and try and develop a structure and a terms of reference that's going to work for all the local organizations for James Bay and Hudson Bay. And so I think the idea for the outcome here today is to try and come up with something that we can use for consultation to help this move forward. Try and come up with an idea for the sorts of terms of reference that would work for those communities, and then go and do that consultation before we start thinking about people signing on to that to create the consortium. And then hopefully we'll get to a point, maybe in a year from now, maybe it's going to take longer, where we have something simple, we just want to work together and collaborate, that people will be willing to sign on to and start it that way. So your point about consultation is really important. Thank you for bringing that up. John?
Thank you, Joel. Just a couple of points to consider. There's the word that's often used, it's called stakeholder, and we find it in the land claims perspective anyway, across Canada, as not really the word to use, it's rights holders. So the first priority for people who are engaged in this process are the rights holders. All the lands and the communities, land claims treaties and whatnot, as being the first primary members whose interests need to be protected. So that could be an important starting point. The other point I want to make is that even though there's different treaties, land claims, regulatory bodies, communities, and the whole thing, I think the common ground that's looked at is the use of Inuit and Cree knowledge, practicing it, using it for the protection and the continuance of the region, the marine region, as well as the people's way of life. So those are tied to that, so that becomes the priority of knowledge. It's not just for research, it's for the continuance of the people. That's probably the best way to protect the region.
I think that's something everyone would agree on. And I think it's important to emphasize that this structure, informal, non-legally binding, just a way to work together, to agree to communicate and cooperate, and would not affect any of the rights or any of the land claim agreements. It would rather be something parallel. That's actually the next slide I had here, whereas a Hudson Bay agreement would likely not usurp any government's jurisdictional authority. It would run parallel to government by developing strategies and practices that voluntarily support the responsible stewardship of the Bay. So thank you for raising that. I think that's really important. Just as we're moving forward in the conversation, just to kind of think about what is the terms of reference, or what is a memorandum of understanding. One definition is that it's a living document that clarifies the role and responsibilities of an organization or a group, its members and its committees. And so both the Arctic Council, for example, or the Hudson Bay Oceans Working Group had set up a terms of reference, which has some really things they thought out that could maybe apply for us. So we were going to show some examples of that. And so we can think about that, and to fit with the vision of what we need to develop these terms of reference in an open, inclusive, collaborative process with the consultation. And so we need to make sure that the process of doing this is right. So the kind of things that I think we need to think about and discuss right now to take to the communities after and just be thinking about over the next year is what are the guiding principles that we all share that we would like to see this help contribute to? What are the goals? What sorts of activities would the consortium do in order to help achieve those goals? What's the scope of what we're trying to achieve? Does it include the terrestrial system, or we can talk about that? And then what sort of structure can we set up that will meet these needs and work for the people, and how can we make that something that's sustainable, that's going to last in the long term beyond the turnover of election campaigns and short-term commitments from different regions and governments. So some of the guiding principles that came out of the Oceans Working Group that kind of reflects a lot of the things people have been saying is having mutual respect and tolerance for the different cultures and values, as well as respect for the environment. These are all just possible things that we could have as guiding principles. Having a holistic perspective that recognizes that Hudson Bay and James Bay must be managed as an entity and not just pieces, but as a full system. The animals of the water don't recognize boundaries from both the physical side and the human perspective. There being a long-term commitment of everyone that's involved. The recognition of Inuit and Cree rights under the land claim agreements, I think, is a fundamental guiding principle that, like you've raised. In terms of decision-making, like Stas brought up, what sort of way do we want to think about decision-making? And really the body is not going to be decision-making in terms of affecting government decisions, because the decision-makers will be around the table, but rather by having a conversation as a group like this, we can make recommendations that might then affect the decision-making. But as the decisions are still going to be made by the land claim organizations, for example. But do we have a preference for really agreeing to things on a consensus basis? And that was something that the Oceans Working Group had. And then the thing that this is really driven by the integration of Cree and Inuit knowledge, local and traditional knowledge, and that guides the science. So just going to go through these and then we can kind of talk about the options and get into it. Some goals that came from these different other organizations that we can consider: increasing the capacity for sharing information, results, knowledge across the stakeholders and across the communities, providing a forum for joint planning and coordination of environmental stewardship activities across the jurisdictions, and this could include helping to coordinate research and monitoring, conservation, like protected areas, integrated co-management, advocacy and outreach, and making sure that Inuit and Cree knowledge is guiding that. One of the other things would be to how can we work together to help leverage funding and awareness, so that, you know, we talked yesterday about how the funding models these days are favoring these big collaborations, and if there's separate groups trying to get funding for a specific project is really difficult now. But if we work together and show that we're integrating the biology and the oceanography and the traditional knowledge and the stewardship, then it shows that we can do something much bigger than the sum of those parts, and there's a much better chance of helping make those things happen. Establishing over time objectives and guidelines which protect, maintain, or enhance the health of James Bay and Hudson Bay ecosystem. Providing the capacity for training, education, and outreach to raise awareness about Hudson Bay in the Canadian public and internationally, and then within the Bay, focusing on youth as the next generation of environmental stewards for the region. So all the different priorities that we saw from those different documents are kind of encompassed in these goals. And so what sort of things could the consortium actually do to help make these goals happen? One of the big things, I think, is just helping the networking and the communications, sharing that information. So can we act as like a directory or a contact list for people that work across James Bay and Hudson Bay? Even just getting the list together for this meeting to organize has taken a couple of years, and we're still missing people. Where do you go when you want to see where everyone else is to let people know about what's happening? So one thing we could do is help have this directory of the different people around the table for James Bay and Hudson Bay. When those different groups are having reports come out, we can help make sure it's accessible to everybody. Helping for planning, coordinating meetings, developing the communications plan and the communications infrastructure. It's clear that there's a lot we can do with some of the new social media that can get youth involved, and we've been developing ways to really share information so you can tag pictures using Inuktitut terminology for ice. We can talk about that later, that you can tag documents in a way to reference it and have these in a common place. We can have a library that looks like Netflix. There's these sorts of things, but at the same time we know that we need to also be doing things in parallel, and people have raised comments that, you know, we can't have just electronic registration forms online for a meeting like this. We need to have hard copies that go to the people in the community. So we need to make sure that our communications is reaching both the modern youth who are using social media, but also reaching people that don't use computers or don't use the technology, and that we can bring that together. And so how do we archive the documents and knowledge and manage the data and information, and also respect intellectual property rights? Developing capacity for community-driven research, for shared networking and collaborating between the different communities, like we talked about, some of the work that's been starting among the different communities, doing similar work to look at the big picture, to assess cumulative impacts, think about sustainable development and environmental stewardship. To kind of document and compile on an ongoing basis issues and priorities of stakeholders and communities, and to set goals and objectives based on those. And to develop an open, transparent, and inclusive planning approach across the jurisdictions. And then things like developing a communications plan and developing youth and community engagement. So these are just some ideas. We can get into the details. We wanted to talk a little bit about the scope. It's important to just define like what's the overall scope of activities. So we're talking mostly about the James Bay and Hudson Bay marine ecosystem. Right now, given the existing group in West Hudson Bay, the roundtable that's been happening for a number of years there, they have that structure. We've now been creating momentum for an East Hudson Bay, James Bay group, which includes East and West James Bay, all the way up the coast to the beginning of Hudson Strait. And I think, see what people think, but it makes sense to have, there's certain areas that it makes sense to have these regional meetings that we would then bring together for a Hudson Bay-wide meeting. In terms of the scope, do we want to think about incorporating Fox Basin and Hudson Strait, Ungava Bay? Are those groups that would maybe want to be participating in the long term, have their own regional meetings, but join in the big term? Like, how do we find the scope of what we do? And I think the starting point would be this East Hudson Bay, James Bay group and the West Hudson Bay group, and bringing those together potentially. We're mostly been talking about marine issues. So should we keep the scope of the consortium to really be focused on the marine ecosystem? I think most people are here thinking about the marine system, and maybe down the road we could start, if it's really successful, then we could start to think about the terrestrial issues and how those affect the marine system as well. So let's think about that a little bit. Some of the things people have been talking about, how do we structure this? What does it mean to be a member? How do we organize? So the ideas that we've been working with based on talking to people here, having a membership. Is that something that's having a steering committee that would consist of members that want to be on the steering committee and help with some of the decision-making processes. Having working groups for things like research or education, youth involvement, communications, having that can bring in expertise. And then having the administrative structure, a secretariat to help run programs, coordinate among people, to organize meetings like this. And so just want to think about these different components and what people think about how we would organize this to happen. So membership, should it be open to anyone at all? If they're willing to sign the terms of reference that's come up with collaboratively, do we allow anyone to be a member? And in many ways that would be beneficial. And even if there's extremist animal rights groups that want to join, if the terms of reference are clear that they're going to be respecting the knowledge and respecting the land claim agreements, then do we still let them participate? Do we let them be on the steering committee? Those are important questions. The members could be representatives of different organizations that bring information to the consortium and then bring information from the consortium back to their respective organizations. What about a steering committee? So we're thinking about the members, we would come up with the terms of reference. People could join by signing the terms of reference. The steering committee, should that be elected? Or should we allow that some members might not have the time commitments to be involved in more regular meetings and decision making, but should we allow anyone that wants to be on the steering committee to be on the steering committee to help guiding the activities of the consortium? How many meetings should we have? Should we have at least 2 meetings a year? Should we make that a requirement? Those can be by phone, that kind of thing as well. The proceedings of those steering committee meetings, should those be open to the public? And who's going to coordinate the steering committee? Should that be a chair that has non-voting rights on the steering committee kind of thing? And ideally, the steering committee would be a structure that directs the secretariat. And so the chair would sit on the steering committee, would be part of the secretariat, and would then take the mandate of that steering committee back to the secretariat to help complete those goals, whether it's about organizing meetings or communications or what the case might be. So a secretariat is kind of like an administrative structure with people that would be hired to help keep things going in the long term, that carry the information, that would help with the daily operations and the activities of the steering committee. Having it managed by a chair based on the direction of the steering committee. And then some initially critical positions are having someone to run the logistics and administration, like Misha's been doing to help make this meeting happen. Having a communications specialist to help with all the networking and sharing the information that's come together here. And then as the consortium grows and evolves, there might be other positions that we need. So we can think about that a little bit. Is something like working groups something that would be productive? Having the steering committee could make decisions about, okay, we need a steering committee for cumulative impacts. We need a steering committee for communications and outreach. We need a steering committee for education and the youth training. And should those working groups could involve members that would be on the steering committee? Should those working groups also allow other experts to come in and participate on those working groups? So those are the kind of things we can think about. So we can talk about these different kinds of components of a structure and what people think. I'd like to hear your feedback. And then we can think about things for funding. And maybe we can come back to the funding thing. I think it's a bit more complicated than like the United Nations and the Arctic Council, as we mentioned. They're all a federal government, so everyone that's at the table is at the same level. So the United Nations and the Arctic Council run by each nation contributes a fee and the same amount. But I don't think that sort of fee structure is going to work here, because is it fair for an individual community of a couple of 100 people to pay the same fee as the federal government or the regional organizations? Or where there's differences in the amount of capacity that people have between East and West James Bay, for example, there's big differences in the amount of funding available. So what's fair? It seems from what I've heard from people that it's better to pay what you can. And so we've had groups like Tides Canada and Oceans North have stepped up to say, whoever can afford it and wants to see this happen, contribute 20K. We're putting in 20,000 as matching funds. And so, for example, that's helped the government of Nunavut kick in 20,000, as well as DFO is talking about kicking in 20,000. And if everyone kicks in a little bit like that, then it can help collaboratively fund it. But then groups that can't afford it, then it's okay. So let's think about those things. So I'm going to open it. Let's have a discussion again. I'll put up this slide about the different components of a structure, and it'd be great to hear what people think about what's the best way to set this up that's really going to work for the needs of the communities and the land claim agreements and working together. Ryan. Sure.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I'll jump in with some comments, because as you've been going through this, I've been trying to wrap my head around it, as I'm sure everyone is here, and I'm sure there's lots of ideas for discussion. It seems to me one thing we can all agree on is that there's somewhat of a shared vision for the Hudson Bay, that everyone wants to see it healthy, communities involved, traditional lifestyles protected, and you could go on. And I think your guiding principles of what we would like to see happen, how to have people involved, is something that almost everyone could agree to, and that it may be that you're looking for something like a well-worded declaration, that you're trying to get everyone to sign on to the declaration saying, yes, in theory, we support those principles, we support those ideas, and those are things that we feel strongly about. A consortium, like some of the objectives that you're talking about and that are on the schedule for further discussion, they're pretty big topics, like coordinating research priorities, coordinating and protected areas planning, ecosystem health, governance structures. There are a lot of people here and organizations represented with very different roles. And for my organization or others, you might have a role in one of those topics, but not all of them. or you might have a role in all of them to varying degrees. So I think that I could see a consortium and a working group. There's very much a need to have that kind of a structure simply for the coordination, because there's a lot of coordination required in those different areas in bringing the right people together to coordinate research priorities, bringing the right people together for agreeing on governance specific to different issues like polar bear management or many issues that people that feel strongly about. So to me, when I think about it, I'm thinking about my organization's role and knowing that it fits in a certain niche, and that if we were to participate, it may be that we would very much agree with what's trying to be accomplished, but only have a limited role in where we actually fit in. Like we might be signatories or a part of a working group that's about ecosystem health, for example, or something like that. So my concept, or at least my thinking when you're going through this, was that a consortium is really necessary to bring everyone together and to coordinate, get the right people in the room. And because the Hudson Bay is such a large group with so many players, but the one thing that everyone can sign onto and governments you want to sign onto is what our vision is, like Lucas's comment about Hudson Bay being a cathedral, something to that effect, and those guiding principles that we're all willing to ascribe to.
Thank you. Matthew, you had a question?
Good morning. As we all know, this is a complex issue that we're trying to address. We have a diverse group, different cultures, people of different disciplines that they're specialized in. I think for me, I would like to see perhaps a statement of principles that we can, that would create a framework of what it is we're trying to achieve. It will show us somehow how the end result would look like as a result of our efforts. I think those principles can include something like cooperation, solidarity, and all of those. I don't have them all, but with the participation of everyone, I think when we break or when we do workshops, perhaps it's something that we can do is to divide the groups into different groups, the Inuit, the Cree, and try to come up with how they see those what those principles should be. The issue that we're dealing with now, it's as you know, it's very complex. It's interdisciplinary. It's in other cases it could be transdisciplinary, and it has to do with it involves culture, social development. It has psychological effects, as you know. When Native people, when indigenous people can't hunt, it affects them psychologically. There's that issue as well. There's of course the economic side of it, and the environmental, and also in indigenous rights. We have rights that need to be recognized and addressed in this process. And I think it's something that we could do, is to find out what those principles would look like if we wanted to head in that direction. You know, we've come as humanity. We have come to a point where we start to question the way we do things. I know Americans do today. We have to go beyond the conventional way of doing things, because indigenous knowledge is very important. It's multidimensional, and it has not been interpreted with the language that is understood by scientists, the government. And the onus to do that is on us as indigenous peoples. And we're starting to talk about setting up an institute that would do that, exactly that, is to interpret indigenous knowledge. And where the industry can come to the institute to ask for if you want to do something with the land or water, how indigenous knowledge will play into the planning of any project. So we have to sort of take the integral approach where we come up with a new way, perhaps a new way of doing things, and this would be an issue, I think, with its multi-dimensions and all that, is to start practicing new ways of doing things. Because what we've done so far to the earth as humanity is not very nice. I'm always concerned about the impact of the nuclear waste that was released into the water as a result of the accident in Japan a few years back. And we know that the effect of the nuclear waste is spreading in the oceans. So I like to see us take the integral approach and consider what we're doing as part of the movement to bring harmony and balance, not only in terms of our human ways of doing things, but also balance and harmony in the natural world. Thank you.
Shamak, did you want to have a comment?
Yes, I want to make a proposal too. Knowing my people depend on the marine region for livelihood, I want to see a good governance of Hudson Bay and James Bay. And I want to propose that we should start with the membership that consists of all the communities within the vicinity of Hudson Bay and James Bay. And according to my customs, we have to respect our elders, their guidance. We need their guidance. Therefore, elders should be included in that membership. And also, I propose to have elected members specifically for this consortium who have their hearts into this good governance. And also all the organizations who have jurisdictions that affect the Bay. I want to start off with that and make a next stage. If everything is going according to the plans, we can make a next step forward by adopting Arctic Council model or United Nations model. I would like United Nations model because within there they involve different nations and they deal with the same issues on that table. That would be very important because there are some species that travel long distance. For example, we have to rely on Canada geese. And Canada geese, they go far down south as Mexico. And I want to have a good governance on protection of Canada geese. Same thing for eider ducks. Common eider ducks, they go as far north as Greenland. And then I would want to be able to say something about the protection of common eider ducks. And again, for beluga, the beluga we rely on travel long distance to their wintering area as far as Labrador Sea. So there are so many jurisdictions that the animal we rely on have to pass through. So I would want to deal with whoever is passed by on the species that we rely on. So that I would say it should be our goal in order to achieve the good governance. It's a marine we rely on, and that's what I would want to see. Hope that's clear.
Thank you. Some really important points there. I think something like that you raised that we should talk about a little bit is you mentioned like should we have elected members or not, and I think that's a really important consideration. But I'm wondering, like, we're not going to be a legally binding entity, and so we really just want to be able to talk together. And so should we allow anyone just to come to that table? Like your elected officials, if the community is an official member, then maybe the person that you've elected to represent that community is there to participate. But like you're saying, any elders from that community should be able to come and be part of that conversation. And it doesn't necessarily require the membership of an individual to join this. But what does it mean to be a member? Really, we just want to be talking and sitting around a table and having conversations for the better of Hudson Bay, James Bay. And so do we need to have an elected structure or not? Or is it really we just need to agree to work together? Are we going to be making decisions that are going to affect Hudson Bay? I think we're going to be making more recommendations that then the different groups would go back to their regional organizations, because they're still going to be the decision makers. So I'm just putting that out there to see what people think, because I think that's important to make sure that if the community signs on and all the communities want to be members, that doesn't mean it's just the elected official that is there to represent their opinion. The individuals, elders can all still come and have the conversation. Really, it's just a statement of that all the communities want to work together. All the regional organizations want to work together. The federal government and provincial governments want to be part of this conversation and work together and facilitate people working together so that we're for the bettership of Hudson Bay. But so thank you for bringing up those points, and it'd be great to talk about them some more.
Okay. What I'm putting on the table is I'm putting minimum of 2 people representing my community, elder for sure, and the reason why elected member is I want to see a person who is really committed to make this happen, and they can say, and the man who can do the job. This is the kind of message I would want to see and vote for someone who has a heart into this important project.
So something like the chair of the steering committee being elected or something like that.
Right. Thank you.
Just to make it a little bit more perspective. I think it was in 2001 where they had public hearing in Montreal on East Main 1A Devotion Project. Remember that? We all remember that. And a couple of months later, the panel made recommendation 34, which I will never forget as long as I live, and nobody ever will, as I don't think so. And that recommendation 34 calls for all the stakeholders, governments, different jurisdictions, scientists, work together, monitor, research within Hudson Bay and James Bay. That's what it calls for. To date, a couple of years ago, nothing. Because the project went ahead anyway by the Prime Minister without all the logistics of that recommendation have been put in place. So that recommendation 34 never get off the ground. And with this consortium, we're the only ones that we try to do something based on that recommendation 34, which panel recommend for, where all the stakeholders within Hudson Bay, James Bay work together, monitor, research what needs to be done. Because nobody's going to come to us and say, we're going to do this research with you. We have to do it ourselves. Especially in Bell Travels or Senegal, we got tired of waiting for someone to come in and do a research for us. We had to go there and do it ourselves, which is a lot better by doing it yourself. That's why one of the things that we've been talking about yesterday too, that community-driven research or monitor. That's why we call it that way. So I think it would be good to have non-elected appointed membership, maybe, because the elected official is elected official. Because sometimes the people want to be elected just for the sake of being on the board, or sometimes. I'm not saying that, but sometimes it's like that. So I just want to make that point a little bit clear, where we're coming from. Thanks.
I think that idea that, it's not about who's going to run things, that it's around the table and that there's no egos and that people are coming very humbly to work together and to be understanding of the other perspectives is really important and as being a basis. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I come with experience working with First Nations on the west coast of Canada, and one of the things that I would observe, and I think I've heard around the room, is that before you start talking about kind of membership and structure, that it would be a really good idea, and I think I've heard others suggest this here today, to talk about what is your common vision and what do you want to achieve together. But for me, what I see around the room is the strength of the Indigenous people who have come together, who are the owners of this area and who are the traditional keepers of the region. And it seems to me that where the strength would be from bringing all of you together to come to develop a vision for what you want to see for Hudson and James Bay. I feel like the researchers and groups like mine, I'm with an environmental organization, we can be there to support you. We could, if you want to do an annual meeting and bring us in to work with you, but it seems to me that where the strength is here is in an organization that brings Indigenous people together for the future and the health of Hudson and James Bay. And if you can structure that, there is incredible power around doing that. And I feel that the rest of us in the room are there as potential supporters and being able to work with you. But I really think the direction needs to come from the Indigenous people in the region.
There's the Arctic Council, for example, has the observer sort of status as well. So, it's possible we could think about a membership that it's all northern organizations and regional organizations that are the members, and that other groups like nonprofits maybe act more as observers or something like that. That's an idea to think about. John?
So I've been involved in various international level processes over the years. So IUCN, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, the Convention on Biological Diversity, some of the Arctic Council processes as well, and also ArcticNet process. All these are very much top-down ways of doing things, meaning most of the control and decision-making is up here with the governments or the science community, the people with the influence and the money. And then when you try to involve indigenous people, it becomes watered down because there's only just a few people representing large areas. So you might want to avoid doing it that way or ending up that way. Where you want the control is really at the local level, trying to find ways that it's driven at that level. And so if it becomes a government-driven process or a Western science-driven process, then something is not working in that way of doing things. So you have to make sure that it's kind of a community level driven process that respects, and I think that essential to implementing the treaties and the land claims. For instance, you have regulatory co-management bodies that have a specific role and a mandate in a land claim. They have a certain role to recommend for decisions to ministers or at a ministerial level, or make decisions about quotas and whatnot. But I wouldn't expect that a co-management body would become an advocacy organization or an activist organization, or else they go outside of their mandate. So what role they would play is perhaps what's been talked about along the way about polar bear and other mammals, about TK. And that's, if you do the TK research with all the mammals, inclusion of Inuit or Cree on various species, then that can go into the co-management process for co-decision around Western science. And so if the process of this so-called consortium is about traditional knowledge, for instance, that knowledge can be used within the implementation of the land claims and treaties without upsetting the process that's there already, or you wouldn't want to have a co-management body thinking that it's going to overstep its role, or else things might not work out too well. So I think everyone needs to look at how the roles are placed with each other, so no one steps on anyone's toes.
Henry?
Thank you. When we usually talk about studies of animals, someone usually comes up with the word animal rights group. These are people coming from the south, but when you go up north, for the information, we have animal rights coming from animals themselves. For instance, one example, a walrus, that we shouldn't talk bad about them because they listen to us. One time there was lots of walruses in my community. That's just an example, but it works around all the way around where we live up north. One time there was this hunter on a kayak saying, hey, you're too small, I'm not going to catch you today. And from that, all the walrus went away. And one day, some elders came around and said that all of these animals, walruses, will come back someday. And so we understand that coming from animals themselves, the rights of animals, that we shouldn't talk bad about them. That's only one example. These different species of animals have this short sort of thing, and if someone comes to us when we're talking about animals and they threaten us with animal rights group, the animals themselves have that power to go away from these areas. So we respect them, just for the people to know on this little item as part of research in our area. Thank you.
Fred.
Coming from the United States, I realize I have a lot of credibility these days.
Since last night.
Since last night, anyway, yes. But when I'm thinking about this group, before I came here and now listening to all the input, it's some excellent ideas, very different than what I was envisioning. But what I hear people saying is an organization that needs a purpose. You know, how is this going to work? What is it going to do? I mean, it's going to bring people together and talk, but to what end? And I think, from my perspective, it sounds like the potential for an avenue between what's going on in each of the communities and in terms of traditional knowledge, in terms of community-based monitoring, the awareness that's going on within the communities that can come together and on a regular basis, annually or whatever, and talk about concerns, things that are being seen that are a concern to the health of the Hudson Bay, James Bay ecosystem. So a way of, when issues come up from a developer or for something, this community can send its connections back out to the villages and go to the elders, go to the monitoring that's going on, and get input from different perspectives and put those together. I see that as being a real value of how this kind of organization could work.
And then I just want to comment a little bit on that. With the communications that I've been doing to the public, is that our goal is to understand what is really happening within Hudson Bay based on our research or monitor, also based on people's knowledge and what we do. And at the end of the day, I say that, okay, here's the document that we have found out this kind of finding within Hudson Bay and James Bay. We can take those documents of our research or monitor and tell the developers or whoever, the governing body of the Hudson Bay, is that here are the things. Something had to happen within companies or corporations that do some kind of mitigation or whatever, whatever they're going to do within Hudson Bay. And I think that would be, ideal, because a lot of times that people think about kind of wrong decisions. The community that I know best is Sanikalo. I know that. And they are not against any kind of project within Hudson Bay, as long as they do it right. As long as they, any projects that their people are involved with it. Decision making, the process, whatever. As long as they're involved, there is no bad project. They are good projects as long as the people are within that project making the same kind of decision with them. So with that kind of recommendation that we're thinking about, is that we can use that tool as a tool to that we have to be involved, because this.
Yeah, and I think, like we've been saying, it's not going to be a group that makes decisions, but there's a strength in people if we come together and there's decision-making organizations around the table, and people agree that this is something that's a priority or this is something that we want to work on, then everyone kind of having that voice and consensus can influence the decision makers. Even though there's no real power, there is a sense of power in terms of working together to come up with a consensus, because then the organizations that do have the decision-making abilities are going to want to listen to the people. Aguilar.
Nakongmik, thank you. This is very critical to me. It's very new for me to, when I'm looking at like consortium, I can't even say it properly in English, but I don't get it really what it's meant. I know the English, it's always got something else, meanings. And so, steering committee, that's the power. I got no power over other land claims. And so, I think for us to become advisory, sort of advising, because we are so much overlapped, and myself, as the Inuk, I felt mistreated by the beluga. Like in Hudson Bay, in Inuk York area, if we get one beluga, they said, you killed 10 belugas. That's the system, what we're facing. So, if I go to Akbet, I could kill many as I want. Those same belugas go through the Davis Strait, Hudson Strait, whatever. This system is not, it's not right. So we should be treated as equal. We are human. Barbarians, no. So I would like to see more like advisory, the body, from organization. We already got land claims. The power is there. We should be just advice. Maybe from the organization could be meet once a year, consortium, that we put the information and the funding will be easier. If we keep on asking funding from the government, you know what they're going to say? I give you money, I control you. That's their system. So we should really keen on our organization in community, so we could advise each other with the elders. So how much they contaminate my animal, I'm still going to eat it. I could eat aged walrus meat. That's my culture. If they said it's awful, somebody said it's okay to me. I like it. That's traditional. I don't like. We should be treated as the equal who we are. Not try to. I cannot remake my fellow Crees. They got their own tradition of life. I respect them that way. So I want more advisory each other what's happening in our areas. But those from the government and scientists, if we want to invite them, we could invite them to advice. Thank you.
Brad?
Good morning. I'd like to make a couple of comments, maybe some observations. One of the things that we have been taught as Aboriginal peoples and as Crees particularly, talk about our situation, is that we are responsible for the land. We can use the resources that it provides, but when we leave, we should leave it at least in the condition that it was given to us, if not better. That is one of the Cree's primary responsibility, so that the land will continue, the resources will continue. That is a primary purpose of our existence here. That is ingrained in us when we are children. And we show that by respecting the land, the animals, and the resources. I think we need to get to the basics and the fundamentals of that responsibility. We need to put in and agree on principles or values, if you will, that will guide this consortium. Values such as respect and integrity. You know, integrity is a word encompassing a lot of other values. That this organization will not be used by some for their own purposes or purposes that they feel that they have to acquiesce to. Like the government, for example, they really should look at these when there's proposals for development as to what is actually going to happen and not sacrifice one for the other. And it's usually the Aboriginal peoples, the land, the environment, and the animals that are sacrificed in the name of progress and economic development. What are we going to do? Or what are the future generations going to do if there's nothing left for them? Because everything has been sacrificed for that previously. We will not have lived up to our obligation and our responsibility to take care of the land, and through that to take care of the resources, and through that to take care of our people. For us, the center of life, for Cree life, is the future, our women, our children. And we all work to provide for them, to assure food security The government should ask themselves, for example, how much will it cost them in health costs in the future if the people are not healthy, and if they take away the resources that they have relied on. You know, it's one thing to depend upon land claim rights, but we have other rights. We have rights of being a human being, in which we are primarily. I believe those rights supersede land claims rights. Land claims rights are open to interpretation, and the powers that be, mostly the governments, they get to decide what they implement, because they know that the Aboriginal peoples don't have the financial resources to fight them. And if they do, they eventually give up anyway, because they will have run out of resources or given up hope. I think it's important that this consortium have a say, and a major say, in what research that is relevant not only for the environment and the resources, wildlife resources, but to the people here. I don't intend to move away from here. This is where I was born. I was not born in the village, I was born out on the land. That's where I intend to stay. And for everybody's information, I intend to live forever. And those principles, fundamental principles, the protection and the preservation of the natural, the ecology, and the environment, the resources, those should be the basis upon which the consortium is formed, to ensure that those who have some responsibility for this are also reminded, and if need be, shamed into fulfilling their responsibilities. I don't think this consortium or the members of the consortium should be used to justify or to rationalize anything that the governments will approve or anything that the developers will do. I didn't agree with Lucasi when he said all development is good. The Cree stand against uranium development. We don't believe that it's good. And to say that, I think I would also say that there should be more than just recommendations in particular cases. There can be information exchanged, but for the right reasons. And that's for the preservation of the ecology and the wildlife resources. And the people, because we will be here. We will continue to practice our traditional activities. Nothing anybody says from the outside will change my views, my beliefs, and most importantly, my values that I was brought up on. Now, these values sustained our people long before the Europeans arrived. They continue to do so, and we show that when we are out on the land and how we use the resources and manage the resources. That will continue until we are forced, or maybe future generations will be forced to discontinue that because of certain things. One prime example of that is here we talked about the eelgrass wildlife habitat for the geese. The geese are not here anymore. So very few people now hunt geese, especially in the fall. Our diet's changed. We spend a lot of more money on non-Cree food like poutine and other delicious goods like that. But it has an impact. The rate of diabetes has increased drastically here in our communities because of that. And the government, the Cree Health Board particularly, spend a lot of money trying to do something about that. But it's what missing is what we need. When we did the native harvesting study in the mid-1970s, the Cree at that time were numbered 6,000, about half on the coast, killed close to 70,000 geese, both Canada and snow geese, annually. Those were on the 3 seasons that the study focused on. And I can say with certainty that we are nowhere near that. In 1970s, in the early 70s, anthropological study determined that 55% of the food of the coastal Cree was migratory birds. And we are nowhere, at least in my house, it's nowhere near that because I don't go hunting anymore in the fall because there's nothing to hunt in the fall. But not only is the food resource affected, all our activities, our traditional activities, are affected as well. We don't have the school used to be closed for 2 weeks in the fall every year to allow the children to go with their families out hunting. But that doesn't exist anymore. So the sense of community that was there and was developed, the teachings, the learnings, they have been put on the back burner because what was used that time is not there anymore. It's not that we're getting the poorer shots, it's just that we don't have anything to shoot anymore. And Orrin disagrees with, what does he know? He's never gone with us. And but I think it's important that we start where we think we should start, not where we are presently, because where we are presently is insufficient, is inadequate, and it has been affected tremendously. We are talking about the restoration and the preservation of the resources. The preservation of the resources that are still there. You know, we all have probably the same understanding about our culture, our hunting way of life, and our relationship to the animals that the Inuit have, because they are the same animals. And a lot of this, you will just have to respect our beliefs, because you will probably laugh at some of it. But to us, it's very real. And a lot of times it meant life or death in the past. So I just wanted to add that to a bit about the discussion itself. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had 2 more comments and then we'll do a coffee break. Kevin, the wireless. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, I'm quite disappointed from the results from last night. U.S. election. I don't know why. That doesn't really concern me, but anyway, that's the first. I know it's not on the agenda. These past 2 days, I've been trying to absorb all the information from what I've heard. You know, looking at what we can do with the consortium. I understand there was another one that was set up. This is our second one. I don't have the information or any reports or minutes from the last meeting, but I just wanted to point out, you know, from across the table, from what I've understood from them too, from the Inuit side, you know, the participation, you know, when we come together to discuss, you know, talking about research. You know, too many times, you know, when we talk about research coming from universities, from the government, excluded a lot of First Nations people. The Inuits, you know, the knowledge that they have, you know, that's what's been discussed. It's what I heard from yesterday. You know, the participation, a full participation. If we're going to set up a table to talk about, you know, the marine life from both sides, we need to understand that we need the full participation from the Cree and also from the Inuit, you know, in terms of knowledge. And when we talk about the land itself, the water, this is where what I mean by participation from all parties. I'm sure the Inuit do understand the same concept of as the Crees, where you cannot separate the land from the people. They're part of the land. Also with the Cree. So you can't sit in an office and discuss the land as a separate item. You know, we've been living like that all our lives as part of the land, the language that comes with it, the animals. So this is the concern from what I've heard from yesterday, the concern that they have already, it's happening with the development from the previous years, like with the hydro development, whatever future development that's going to be coming in within the territory, the mining. It does affect the land and the animals, and we feel the impact, and they see the impact, especially in the water where ice is changing. Even the color, even the, we've noticed from our side, you know, I sat down with George here a lot of times of the changes that's been happening within the territory. Even the snow is changing color to brown. And I asked him, because he has more knowledge on the ice and what's happening even with the seal and the polar bear. So, and yeah, there's a lot of, from our side, from the Crees, we still harvest the fish from the salt water, and it's a major concern from the families that live along the coast. I like to see, like we're discussing to setting up committees, steering committees, you know, to look at a working group to discuss what's going to be on the table. You know, from what I've hearing from everybody since yesterday, you know, the concerns that they have it's already happening. It's been happening for a long time. You know, the animals that are out there, the mammals, how it's been affected by the changes of the climate, the environment, development of resources, the water, and also I haven't heard any mention of, because it's happening from both sides of James Bay and also Hudson's Bay. How, I like to hear from them too, from the other side of the bay. You know, I'm sure that they have the same concern that we have from the East Coast, also from the West Coast. Any development that's going to be happening on their side too, it's going to affect us all too. So, like I said, you know, I haven't really followed. I don't have much information of, you know, what was started to look at, you know, what we're talking about these 2 days. But I am concerned too for my community, also to my members that are still out there hunting fish. Every time we have a gathering, this is what the concerns they have and what they see, the changes that is happening within the territory. You know, I believe, you know, that I think it was repeated from yesterday and today too. The traditional knowledge that is needed, you know, to be able to, you know, any research done, any work that's going to be happening within the region, it has to have a full participation from our side, from the Cree and also from the Inuit. When we say knowledge, they already have it. You know, they've been living out there on the land all their lives. It doesn't come from any academic institution. They lived all their lives. That's why I'm saying, you know, it does not separate. You cannot separate it from the land and the language, the land itself and the people. We have to discuss that like it's the same. Like we lived all our lives within the land. It comes with it. Our lives, you know, our culture it's built in within the land. This is something that we have to understand. And that's what I wanted to say. I'm very interested in learning more of how we can, you know, set it up in terms of working committees. We like, from our side, I'm sure we're going to be participating, you know, from our side, and also how it's going to be set up. Somebody just mentioned earlier, you know, the number of participants that should be in committees and working groups. You know, from each community, we should have at least a participant, 1 or 2, to have the information, you know, being brought to the table, and also in return, if there's any questions from our communities, whoever's involved in that committee will be able to bring in the information about the questions that we have from each community. Wajib.
Thank you. And about the report, we do have the report online, and we can make sure you have a copy of that from the last meeting, and we'll have a detailed one from this as well. Yeah. And just to keep, we're going to have one more quick comment before the coffee break, and then we're going to come back and talk about protected areas.
George wanted to make a comment here.
Hello, good morning. My name is Willard Napash. I just want to talk about the phase 1. It's about the impacts for the trap lines after they build the dams here in James Bay. They say there were 38 trap lines, and when they built dams, trap lines were affected 18, and only 20 trap lines, 47.4% the impact. But the impact doesn't stop there. Also affected the humans, water, lands, and the species also. Since the diverted Waskaganish River towards the LG2 reservoir, the water level went high in the reservoir, and the Waskaganish River went low, and the hunters started to have problems about this situation. Imagine if they build the dams up north, it's going to be a lot of impacts for the future, etc. Hydro said it's a clean energy, but it's not. It's polluted, the lands, the water, and the species. And the numbers went up, all the impacts. Also, the nutrients can pass where the dams are. And like I said, the numbers went up. Why I'm saying that? Because, like I said, there were like 38 trap lines, and doesn't stop there. And it's always affected in the James Bay area on the shore. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. You had a comment?
All right. Sure, I'm yours. Hi. Okay. My name is George Kutlu. It's an Inuit name in the James Bay, Wiminji. I'm only one survivor in Wiminji right now, Inuit. According to thousands of agree, but I like them all. Doesn't matter who you are, I like them all. Anyway, I've been traveling by canoe up and down a lot, from Satluit to Good Jock, all the way down to Wiminji. My end up is Eastman. I never go back to Skaganish around, but today I find very, very strange the world I'm living in, what I saw. Even the islands, I living around islands for all my life. I seen all the islands that grow, some of them flower, I never seen grow, different flower. Very strange. Some of them birds, very strange. Some of them seals, very strange. Some of them are whale, are very not as usual white before. I've been there before Hydro built a dam in the river, 1984. Ever since, the whale, animal, the fish are very changed at the beginning. Some fish I caught just like jello. The meat should be a little harder than that. Some of them I don't feel like to eat. It's reason figure what fish, jello, meat, white fish look like. That one I threw it away, but it's difficult to eat things in the James Bay. It's so many dams in the Hydro-Quebec, all kinds of bubble coming out to the sea. Even like oil and the sea, it's not like that before 1992. I've been there for 24 years, and I've seen all different, what I got, my traditional food, even mussel, oyster, low tide, seaweed, what I eat, it's all not the same anymore. What is happening? Now we're talking about membership steering committee working group. How we gonna get this thing working group? Are we gonna ask us how we gonna study? Even we study, we never understand about that. We are, the thing is for me, coming from the dam, what they, you can't even drink water, fresh water anymore. No way to drink in James Bay River anymore. We have to carry from the store sometimes. Sometimes even on the island, we scared to drink a bit of all kinds of ashes coming down from sky somewhere. And the water become like yellow to drink, look in a glass. It's not white anymore. That's what I've been, 24 years I've been seeing. Also, I go with the crew going hunting in the bush they don't carry, they have to carry their own water from the store. Nothing on the lake to drink anymore. Everything is difficult to find things. Things are so changed. Look at that, I'm supposed to go out in Skidoo today. I'm still using paddling canoe or outboard motor. Not supposed to. How come these things are so much changed? Are we making so much pollution? What's the idea? That's what we need, working group membership, you say. We have to find what are we expect to eat now. We're gonna be scared. Even beluga. Even I heard some Inuit having beluga problems. He say, one guy talk about, I kill one, he say he got 10. That's not normal to say that. It does not should be lie too much about that. You know, animals are very big 1,000-pound well. Even they studying the whales are all crazy. I heard about on the radio and CBC things are Inuit broadcasting. The guy studied the whales. You have quota to kill, how many to kill? It doesn't sound right. You know, the old people, like old traditional people, they know what to do with their animal. They pushing by, seems to be white pushing them out, like how many you have to be killed? These people, they swiped from before white man came in. Now the white guy want to study the whale, they have problem with that thing. Anyway, that's something like that. And James Bay, you know, lot of eider ducks too, all kinds of ducks. But polar bear never around in James Bay for 24 years ago. I starting to seeing things in island to island. They're not supposed to be around there with the warm country. They're looking for ice. What is the problem? Are we going to find that in the working group? We still never understand about that. Animal can't travel to find. They had problem like us. We all have problem. Anyway, that's why we come here to talk about. We have a lot of problems. All kinds of sea. Even the big wind is never here before. Even the wind changes without going low. Even the snow is never the same anymore. Snow turning like a pecan powder. Even the ice is never thick enough. 24 years ago, the ice is 4 feet thick. 1 year at a time, now it's 3 feet this year. What's going to be next this year? Half inch? See how it changed this. Anyway, we got to find out what we're going to have a group and tell us what to do. That's my opinion for today. I have a lot more to say though. What Chia Mshwa?
Chair.
That's George Kulu speaking.
All important things and the monitoring and that really needs to help. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to take a coffee break now. We're going to come back and talk about protected areas. We can maybe continue the conversation about things like structure later on. The main thing is that structure or no structure, as long as we're meeting and getting together and talking, I think that's the most important thing.